Do you want to just pop up? Yeah. So what you need is you need a shorty to sort it.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
My name is Anna McCormack and I'm your chairperson for this meeting, No Sex Self-Identification in Queensland. I run the IWD Brisbane Meanjin Facebook page, and under that banner I organise events and groups to further the most important struggle I have ever been involved in my life. I've been involved since 2017 in learning more about and acting against an ideology that denies women exist. This is an existential struggle, and I've never been involved in such a struggle before. We meet on Aboriginal land. We recognise Aboriginal custodianship of this land over 60,000 years, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present and to come. We acknowledge the land was taken by force. As always, I acknowledge the women of the women's resistance who have struggled for liberation for thousands of years, and I acknowledge their leaders. I acknowledge many women, especially lesbians, have lost their lives in the women's resistance, and that today many of us, including me, have lost employment, friends and political connections because we fight for women's rights and children's safeguards. And I say, we will never give in. Thank you to Kelly, our videographer, who's live streaming and recording for the IWD Brisbane Meanjin YouTube channel. No participants, except those of us at the front table, will be videoed. The panel discussion will not be videoed. Thank you to Helen, who's taking photographs for the IWD Brisbane Meanjin Facebook page. No participant wearing a burgundy ribbon will be photographed. Thank you to everyone who's worked for today, and a special thank you to the kitchen staff who've been allowed to leave their kitchen and join the rest of us. A particular thank you to the small group of women who met with me last weekend at my home at the end of a very nasty week that culminated in my booking at the Royal being cancelled. To Leah, Amanda, Helen and Sue, thank you. Toilets are to my right, and it's a transphobic, bigoted venue, so there are separate toilets for women and men. You will hear today from 5 well-informed, compassionate and wise women, experts in their fields all. You'll be able to ask them questions at the panel, and over afternoon tea you'll be able to engage them in discussion. I said 5 because that's what I'd written down. In fact, Edie Wyatt has sent her apologies. She's ill, so that you'll hear from 4 wonderful women. I'm confident you'll be inspired to take action to remedy injustice by the state, the corporations and the brown shirts who threaten us and threaten the original booked venue for this meeting, Royal on the Park, until the Royal felt they had no choice but to cancel my booking last Friday as a result of the threats. I hope you've bought lots of raffle tickets because the prizes are worth it. 2 lovely pieces of artwork by lesbian feminist artist Donna Malone form 1 raffle prize, and 2 current excellent books, one by Holly Lawford Smith and one by Renee Gerlich, who's here with us today, form the other raffle prize. I'm a left-wing woman with more than 40 years activist experience in a range of movements, from refugee advocacy to Latin American solidarity campaigns to union activism and women's abortion rights campaigns. And I have never felt so disgusted and so dismayed by the complete absence in the Brisbane left of any evidence-based analysis of women's oppression and the need to safeguard children. The abandonment of material analysis by left groups is an indication not that material analysis is flawed, but that what passes today for the left has given up on class struggle. Instead, it's embraced bourgeois notions of identitarianism. It's also embraced the anti-left practice of silencing the voices of dissent. And I would mention some examples in Brisbane of groups that have done this. Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Brisbane Retired Unionists, Every Solidarity Group in Brisbane, and the Communist Party of Australia. There is nothing socially just, progressive, or genuinely left about removing the rights of women, especially lesbians, and abandoning children's well-being and safety. Free speech has always been valued and advocated by those without power. Until the rise of gender ideology, the left had upheld the core value of free speech, sometimes half-heartedly, but now, as an adherent of gender ideology, the left is not half-hearted about free speech, it's actively opposed to it. It also actively excludes from its ranks radical and gender-critical feminists, and I know there are a few of us in this room today. Identity politics is anti-left because it avoids class. It denies sex class. Identity politics is essentially individualist. It replaces class analysis and class struggle with individual bullying, workplace punishment for stepping out of line by challenging groupthink, and I know a number of you in the room have endured that, expulsions from political groups, and loss of paid work. Women's rights are not regarded as important because women are not seen as fully human, and nor are children. We can see that in the refusal of our Attorney General and Minister for Women, Shannon Fentiman, to include women's groups in the consultations that are leading to the drafting of sex self-identification legislation. Shannon Fentiman and Premier Palaszczuk have told women we're not stakeholders in legislation that erases our rights and our existence. Sadly, not one Queensland Government MP accepted my invitation to attend today's meeting, and I invited them all, with the exception of the Greens. The ideology embraced by the Labor state government and what was the left is based on a set of lies. The lie that biology doesn't exist. The lie that gender dysphoria is a thing when it isn't. What is termed gender dysphoria is in fact body dysmorphia. The lie is also based on an avoidance of the extraordinary rise of porn, leading to increased numbers of autogynephiliac men who get off on notions of their own femininity and force their partners to play along with practices that objectify and dehumanize women. And the state can only continue to prosecute the lie by silencing us and cancelling us, pretending we don't exist, as the media does, and making us frightened to speak. We won't be frightened to speak. While we're experiencing huge setbacks in women's rights across the Western capitalist world, and while the resistors are small in number, we're on the grassroots ground floor of the rebirth of the women's movement. And that, my friends, is exciting. None of us can do everything to turn back this dangerous ideology that further entrenches capitalism and male supremacy, but all of us can do something. We can write to and meet with our state MPs. We can raise the issues in our community and church groups and school parent groups. We can learn by attending meetings like this one, and, if it's safe to do so, by attending street rallies. There'll be a rally in Brisbane for International Women's Day in March. I invite you to be there. And now it's my proud honour to introduce the first of our 4 speakers. Deborah Ackerson is a champion weightlifter. She has represented Australia at 5 Commonwealth Games and 2 Olympic Games, winning Commonwealth Games medals including bronze, silver and gold. She has excelled also at discus, hammer throw, national level track cycling and national level rugby. Deborah has a law honours and criminology double degree and is a mother to 3 daughters. Deborah will speak to us today on fairness in sport. Thanks, Deb.
Thank you. I don't quite know how to follow that. That was amazing. Very encouraging. Okay, well, I'm going to have... Say it again. Oh yeah, I've got a slide somewhere. A little bit of a rush slide. It's very basic, but I didn't want to kind of overwhelm you with a lot of visuals while I'm talking, because I am so engaging. Thank you. No, you're right. Probably don't need to wait for that. Okay, so fairness in sports. Now, I've done a lot of speaking over the years, but this is kind of my first of its type, so forgive me if I don't kind of flow as I normally do. I've been an athlete training in a sport since I was 14 years old. Much to my grandmother's disgust, I took up weightlifting and enjoyed it. She wasn't too keen on that, and my brother was actually doing modelling at the time, so she was all very confused with everything. Yeah. But you know, by the time she was getting interviewed about her famous granddaughter Olympian, she was pretty happy about that. So I spent 20 years in my prime years training and competing at the elite level in multiple sports that were just mentioned. So I think what started off my whole career was after I was told I was too short and was never going to be a good thrower, I ended up coming 3rd in the world in discus in an under-18 competition. I get that fire in the belly and start to like stick it to the male coach. And then, you know, I went to weightlifting and had a trial out there and was, you know, encouraged to come and start because they really wanted more women in the sport, but was probably too tall to ever be a good weightlifter. So that's how I started in the sport. I did the track cycling for a season, did rugby football for a season, but yeah, weightlifting was my main love. Just absolutely fell in love with it from the first time I saw a weightlifter up on the screen. It was the holidays and I had nothing else to do. I was bored. My parents never encouraged TV. My mum was an opera singer turned teacher and my dad was an engineer and geologist. So yeah, we didn't watch TV much. But I watched this weightlifting competition and to my shock and horror as a 14-year-old girl sitting on the couch, saw this 150 kilo male weightlifter with a shaved head come out and lift these incredible weights. And you know, I thought, apart from seeing the veins through his head and thinking his head was going to explode. I eventually thought how amazing that would be to be so strong, and I've got to tell you, having 3 daughters and moving house lots of times, and it comes in really handy to be strong. So when I finally started weightlifting, it was around 1999 was my first competition, and it had just been announced that women finally had the right to compete at an Olympic Games, and it wasn't until the Sydney 2000 Olympics that women got to compete. So that was, 104 years of not competing at the Olympics in weightlifting. Obviously the men competed as a foundation sport in 1896. There was a few world championships before that, but Sydney 2000 was it. And there were still actually some votes against women being able to compete in weightlifting. I know there's a lot of myths around the sport. Obviously it doesn't make you sterile or infertile, and you know, I've got 3 daughters, so there's just a lot of myths growing up in the sport, in a male-dominated sport, that I really had to encounter, and you know, I became a bit of an advocate for my sport to show other people that you can lift and it's safe and all that sort of thing. It was 52 years before women could compete at the Commonwealth Games in weightlifting as well, and I was actually part of that first team, which it was significant at the time, but you know, it's something as an athlete you just forget it and you look on to the next thing. But now looking back, that was a pretty special moment. For 52 years, women watched weightlifting on TV until they could compete. So, quite ironic then that I did 5 consecutive Commonwealth Games, and my last Commonwealth Games, which was at the 2018 Commonwealth Games in the Gold Coast, I competed against a transgender athlete, Laurel Hubbard. You may all have heard of this weightlifter from New Zealand. So, of course, this issue and this debate, which is going on right now all around the country and the world, it's not theoretical for me. It's actually what happened and my experience. And even yesterday, I was down in Melbourne for a forum with national level policymakers and heads of sport all around the country. And I was the only one in the room that really could give lived experience of what it actually felt like and give that side of it, and what it felt like for me to line up, to have 20 years, busting myself in the sport, in a male-dominated sport, to be recognised. You never lift as much as the men for various reasons that I'll cover later. But it took a lot for me personally, as one of the, not the first woman, but one of the sort of the women that really paved the way for the other girls in the sport to then line up and be standing on a stage with a transgender athlete. It was very confronting. So I'm glad I could give my opinion and my view on that, because it really did open a lot of eyes yesterday. Initially when this athlete wanted to compete in the female category, the only requirement was basically a GP to tick it off and just start like hormone suppressants and testosterone suppressants, and I don't know the ins and outs of it all, but basically 12 months to get it down to a certain level. So although that's definitely going to be changing, and I believe in other sports it's changed significantly, the requirements, that's what happened. So I will cover that later, but it's basically 10 nanomoles per litre, and I found out yesterday that that's the level of testosterone. And I found out yesterday that there's been a study of 1,332 female Olympians to see what is their natural level of testosterone, because I've always wondered that for myself with 20 years of drug testing. And apparently the average level is 0.67. So I didn't realise it was that low, to be honest. I honestly, some were up a little bit higher, but actually some of them went positive, so they were, not higher naturally. So that really did surprise me yesterday, that it was so low. So this athlete began to transition at 34 years of age. So had been a national champion, broken records as a teenage weightlifter, national records, and then took a significant period of time, about 16 years off the sport. Now it's difficult to come back after Christmas, to be honest, after so 16 years is amazing. And then to debut as the oldest ever Olympian in a foundation sport at 43, and went in as a medal contender. Was injured, unfortunately, but sorry, yesterday I had to be really careful with how I was saying everything, and now I've got to be really careful with how I say it. It's a very weird place to be honest. To be talking honestly and like it's a reality, having to have these kind of discussions and arguments, which I'm sure you've all experienced that. So fairness, to me, this is what I always speak about. Fairness underpins sport. It is why we have, why my 3.5-year-old doesn't race against the boys at Little Kindy. It's why my girls have a separate race, girls and boys. It's because it's fair. So that is, to me, a lot of discussion is about fairness and inclusion. And as far as I'm aware, that the Olympics aren't about inclusion, really. It's about the best. I'm competitive down to the absolute. Like, I play chess and I get angry when I don't win. So, high performance sport is about our bodies, what our bodies can do, and the best athletic body wins the competition. So fairness to me is essential. So why having biological males compete in sport, women's sport, is unfair? First of all, so I've just got a whole list of things that I've sort of looked up and put together, and they're very obvious, but anyway. Broader shoulders, larger hands, which, these are all for most sports, but not for every sport, but larger hands, obviously grip strength is something that we discussed yesterday, is a thing that really doesn't change actually when someone transitions, which is obviously really essential for weightlifting when you're picking up a heavy bar. So larger hands, feet, when you've got bigger feet, you've got more area for force production on the platform, so that helps. Which is an advantage for many sports. So men have 66% more upper body muscle than women do. I hate all this because it's the sort of thing that I train so hard to overcome, but it's just, I've seen teenage boys come into the gym when I've been the best woman in the country for like 8 years, and then these teenage boys come in and they're lifting almost equivalent within months. So it's so disheartening, but it's what I hold on to is I don't have testosterone like they do. So anyway, 66% more upper body muscle than women and 50% more lower body muscle. Men of larger hearts can pump more blood around the body, particularly lungs and body tissue, which obviously oxygenates and helps you continue at a higher work rate and more intense physical work rate. So men have bigger, stronger bones, larger skeletal structure to hold more muscle, larger bones facilitate better leverage, which obviously gives an advantage. Men are on average taller, at least 10 centimetres taller they've looked at. I don't know whether that was around the world or Australia. Giving, again, advantage in most sports. High hemoglobin level, which allows the body to oxygenate the muscles. And on average, there's an absolute minimum of 10% performance gap. That can stretch right up to, in some sports, up to 50%, and I've got that a little bit later on. But at least 10%. Men have a greater amount of fast twitch muscle fibres, and that even in itself is huge. Because you think about any power sport, which is a lot of sports, run faster, jump higher, all that sort of thing, fast twitch muscles are important. So that's explosive power. And male marathon runners particularly have a lower body fat percentage as well. I think that's probably just general across the whole population, but anyway. So why biology matters? So I looked up a sports performance bulletin, and I thought it was really interesting to look at the physiological factors, so the muscle force and power production. I won't get too much into this because I'm not sure if your eyes are glazing over yet. Size and characteristics and the cardiorespiratory capacity. So obviously bigger lungs mean you can breathe more, oxygenate muscles and work at a higher rate. And when I did my year of track cycling, that was just a massive thing that I noticed, was that I couldn't work at that higher rate compared to the males. So I did do a power output test. So you sit on a bike and you pedal as hard as you can for like 10 to 15 seconds. And then there's one where you go for as long as you can and the intensity increases. And so as your heart rate's going up, because you're having to push the pedals harder, the intensity and the resistance keeps on improving. So I did get, I did well in that one, but my power output test was the best one, where I got to, in 10 to 15 seconds, I got close to a 1500 watt output. And when I got off the bike, they looked at me and said, "Congratulations, you're the third best man in Australia, compared to your body weight, compared to your power output." And I was like, "Oh, big enemy is, by the way." That's the only time I beat her. So the difference, so there was a study looking at just moderately trained males and females, so not elite athletes. And again, looking at the lean body mass, for example, plus 45% for men. Body fat, minus 35%. Muscle mass in the lower body, I mentioned that before, but they're saying about 33%. Muscle mass in the upper body, about 40%. Grip strength, plus 57%. Knee extension, so just the knee strength and the extension, the peak torque, plus 54%. So kicking a ball, that's what that helps. Tendon and tensile force, 83% plus. Absolute oxygen uptake, plus 50%. Relative oxygen uptake, plus 25%. Lung ventilation, plus 48%. Cardiac output, plus 30%. Cardiac stroke volume, plus 34%. Blood hemoglobin concentration, plus 11%. So you can see massive, massive differences. So you can look up any world record, Olympic record, and I have not found one where the women's is better than the men's. Male performance advantage is between 10 and 50% on sports. So weightlifting, they had about a 29 to 34% difference in the abilities of men over women. Table tennis serve, 16 to 22%. When people go, "Oh, it's only for certain sports and every sport should have their own policy and it doesn't matter." Well, there's still fast twitch fibres when you're playing table tennis. So every sport, it makes a difference. And my whole thing with weightlifting was telling every girl, apart from halving your risk of osteoporosis in later life, doing weightlifting and weight-bearing activity will make you faster, stronger, and better in every other sport. You don't turn into Arnold Schwarzenegger the second you start weightlifting. I mean, I dropped a lot of weight before I started putting on a lot of muscle. But my whole thing is talking about, how weightlifting is so good for you and how you have to be strong, generally, in life, and particularly as you age. And, and so to hear sort of, people saying, well, it only affects sports where strength is related, I was just thinking, I don't know a sport where strength is not related, because that's what sport is. And then in rowing and running and swimming, they're saying about a 10 to 13% increase. So yeah, the current, every sport basically says, well, the Queensland, or the club says, oh, what does Queensland do? And Queensland have to do what the Australian sport does, and their policy is. And then usually that national sport goes, well, what's our international sport say? And if they're rubbish and they say ridiculous things, then they just go, well, essentially if we have our athletes competing at this level, we want it to be in line, because if they go to a world championship, they need to know what they're aiming for. And so if their testosterone levels are at 10, but we're saying it has to be at 5, well then our athletes are not going to do as well against those. So it's just such a complicated thing, and every sport doesn't want the responsibility. I mean, I was on our national board for 5 years doing policy, not this one, it hadn't happened yet, but thankfully, but you know, it's one of those things that no one wants to be the one getting sued or to be dealing with this issue. And I mean, the biggest thing is that, you know, Sport Australia have got the exception to the Discrimination Act, and the exception is that based on stamina, physique and strength, you can exclude someone. Now we're talking about sport: stamina, physique and strength. I can't think of any sport where one of those three is not an issue. So really, sports are able to exclude someone on that basis. Anyway, the IOC took 2 years to come out with this policy, which basically says it is necessary to ensure, insofar as possible, that trans athletes are not excluded from the opportunity to participate in sporting competition. The overriding sporting objective is and remains the guarantee of fair competitions. That was further down, a fair bit further down. I mean, in my mind, I think of all the countries where sport is never an opportunity for lots and lots of people, and that's probably disheartens me the most, really. Right, so that's all very technical there. Page 2. So you may have seen there's a boys versus women's website. It's very interesting. I only just had a really in-depth look at it recently. It shows all the performances of high school boys at the national level in America compared to female Olympians at the 2016 Olympics. So, you know, it's done all within a very short time period, very close together. I found that really interesting because the 100 metre sprint, 200, 400, 800 high jump, pretty much every Olympic female gold medalist would have come about 9th compared to the teenage boys. I'll just let that sink in for a minute. I think there was one race and it was about the 5,000 metres where probably one amazingly freak of a female would have come second. In 50 metre swimming, it was the same: 50, 100, 200, 400 freestyle. That's basically all I looked at, and it was similar. It was about 9th place. So coming back to like my lived experience, which no one can have a go at because it's my story and it's my truth for me, is 20 years I was drug tested as an athlete. So it was all very exciting when I had my first drug test. I mean, if you don't know what drug testing involves, I sort of felt like I'd really reached, you know, an accomplishment when I got my first drug test. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure it was overseas, so it was all a bit strange in Poland. But if you don't know what drug testing is, they basically notify you and say, right, I'm your drug tester and this is the other person with me, and we're going to stand here and watch you until you provide the sample. So that's fine. You obviously can't run away and hide, which people have been known to do. And you just keep on drinking until you have to go to the bathroom, and when you go to the bathroom, they come with you and you have your clothes up to somewhere around your middle. Some people want it really high, some people want it off, but I usually just get to the top of the stomach, and pants have to be on the floor or off, and they need to watch the urine leave your body. And you know, some people like to get a good angle at it, but they need to see it pass from your body into the clean beaker that you've selected and opened and only you touch. So a lot of people think like I had my drug testing for work for the first time a few months ago, and I was all there ready to get naked, and this was like, so it's very different, very different. So that's what I've done for 20 years, and in fact the last drug test I was 5.5 months pregnant, and when I said to her, you really can stop now because I'm not lifting anymore and I'm not going to... they actually knew about my third pregnancy before any of my family, because I just wanted them to know that when the sample comes back, you know, not to tell anyone. And obviously, you know, there's blood testing used now. I was the first weightlifter actually in Australia that was blood tested years back to provide a bigger testing, I don't know, for a longer period of time and for different things, and it's more accurate and that sort of thing. So that's pretty invasive, to be honest, to have your blood taken to be tested. So all that was testing to make sure that I didn't have an unfair advantage. I was gender tested as I think I was about 15, or 16 maybe, for my first World Junior competition. Apparently they stopped that in 2000s because they found out that it wasn't completely accurate, or it could pick up abnormalities that I don't know, intersex athletes maybe, I'm not sure. But you know, it was quite a thing at my school. I was telling everyone I was getting this gender test, and my friend's like, what was it? I went, well, they get this cotton ball, it's like a cotton stick thing, ear poker, and they scrape the inside of your mouth. Friend's like, I'm so glad you said mouth just then. And then they do the swab and just make sure you check your chromosomes. And I've still got that. I've still got that at home. Congratulations, you're a female. So it was very exciting that day. So obviously they're testing for testosterone levels and to make sure, so it can be within a range, but it's basically, for the last 20 years I've got this whole, I've never seen it, but it's this whole collation of all my test results to make sure that there's no sudden spike. So you can have naturally high testosterone levels. It generally needs to be within a range, and they'll tell you if it's not because there's some reason why it's not. But generally, it's basically kept a record of all that. But it's to make sure that my testosterone levels aren't where a male's is. So which obviously boosts your training ability, helps you to train harder for longer. It doesn't suddenly grow your muscles, but it makes you work harder and allows you to work harder so that your muscles can repair and then get bigger and stronger. So, so that was 20 years of my competition to make sure I didn't have an unfair advantage. And so to line up against a transgender athlete, that was hard. That was the hard part, to know that I'd done all this to prove it's a fair competition. I mean, in the meantime, I had competed at Olympics where athletes had tested positive. I mean, it took 9 years for me to wait to move up 2 spots in my Olympic placing because of 2 athletes, actually 2 medal winners, to have their medals taken off them 9 years later. I mean, my parents were always ones that, that said goodbye at the airport. Bye, don't worry, you're a winner. Everyone else is on drugs, don't worry. Stop saying that. Don't say that to the media. So to allow transgender athletes, biological males, to have all those physical benefits that I've mentioned, up to 10 or 20 times higher than your average female, to me does not make sense with a fair competition. So I've heard the arguments that these larger and heavier, I don't know if you saw the Insight or the ABC recently, Q&A, which was absolutely done ridiculously. You can't throw that many topics in for that period of time. Just so you know, I was called the day before after I contacted them, was told by someone to contact them. As my oldest daughter was going into an MRI machine, I was messaging it and then putting my phone away and then getting a call from a GP about my other sick child that nearly lost her eye in a freak eye injury. And then when I did that Q&A show, I had the other one vomiting in the room next door. So there was a lot going on. I enjoyed the Kieran Perkins eye roll at me. Anyway, I met him yesterday, and it was okay. So so I've heard the argument that now these huge males are powered by these tiny little engines with low testosterone, that now they're actually at a disadvantage. And I go, well, you just said these huge, big, giant males. Yeah. So I'm sorry, that to me, that's an advantage straight away. I noted on that show that that Professor Ada mentioned that speed is something that doesn't go away. And that's been mentioned a few times in different things that I've seen. Speed is half of power. It's half of power. Power is strength and speed. So when you talk about speed is still the same, it still means that that's an advantage. So there's just so many, So yes, so one thing that testosterone provides, not only the ability to train longer and harder, bigger, stronger muscles, but the biggest thing that that hit me, this is 5 years ago now, when I always said to my husband, this will not be an issue about weightlifting, it'll come up in the media, it'll be a bit of a thing, but it's not till our female swimmers are going to be lining up on the blocks against our stars of the sport, these golden girls, our swimmers are going to be competing against transgender athletes. And so that's where that I knew this would be an issue. So thanks to international coverage, that's what's happened. So so the IOC has brought in a life ban for second positive because when you have the testosterone levels, it doesn't increase only the size of your muscles, but the number of muscle fibres. So once you have an increase in the number of the muscle fibres, it's irreversible. So it's, for some people, worth going positive. So this weightlifter came out of nowhere, she got a world record. At 15, she'd gone positive already got an irreversible residual advantage, and was banned for 2 years, came back and was a world record holder. So, last page. Right, so last of all, so apart from all those physical advantages and testosterone and everything else, the menstrual cycle is one thing that was is rarely brought up, but it's something that I bring up because it affects females and women, and particularly female athletes. It's one of those things that when you first start the sport, apart from realising that you're going to have to get drug tested one day and have that go on, it's also being able to, well, having to talk to your coach about your period because you feel like a rubbish for however many days. So the training program has to be altered around that time. You've got a higher increased risk of injury, joints are lax. I just heard about that thing yesterday. I can't remember the name of it, but something about your vision and your brain ability to, so that's a thing. I didn't know that during your cycle. But yeah, for me, at least three of my training sessions for 3 days has to be altered. There was one time I remember just thinking to myself, it's all in my head, just push through, and I injured my knee just because I didn't have that fast twitch. I just was not up to my best. So when you're thinking about potentially a week for every female athlete that's altered, we're talking 1 year out of every Olympic cycle build-up. And to me, that's just case closed. That's significant. So why am I speaking here? It's not because I'm competing anymore, because I finished the day that I found out that I couldn't get a World Masters record anymore because of Laurel Hubbard improving it by about 15 to 20 kilos on each lift. And I was going to hold on and compete at a World Masters Games, but when I saw that, I thought, well, there's no point in competing anymore. So I self-excluded. So I guess I know how hard I worked for all those years to be the best female weightlifter that we've ever had in the country, the only female weightlifter in the Hall of Fame for Australian weightlifting. To have these achievements, to pave the way for other girls and women. But I've got 3 daughters as well, and they're going to be elite athletes. My oldest has just come 4th in Australia in judo early this year. That's going to be her backup for weightlifting. And she got put with the boys for training, and although she's incredibly strong, she's practically my size. Not quite, she's lean. But I can see the difference. I can see the difference in the training. Even though she's stronger, there's still so many ways in which she's not up to speed with the boys, even at the age of 10, 11 recently. So I've been coaching junior soccer with my middle child, and when people say that it's all about the puberty stage, it's just not. I mean, at conception, a male baby has a fair bit. Is that my light stop now? Oh, sorry. Well, so I can see already at the age of 5 and 6 is that the physicality differences between the boys on the team and the girls on the team. And a lot of the girls are getting hurt and run into and whatever, and they don't want to do it anymore. So as much as mixed teams can be okay, my 2 kids now don't want to play soccer because they're getting knocked around the place. So I want girls to compete in sport. I want them to compete in sport from the very low level, community, basic sport, and hopefully they do it for the rest of their lives because it's so good for you. So that's why basically I'm, an advocate in this space, because it's just, I want it to be fair. And yes, safety of course, but fair competition. I don't train to, sorry, I had a really good conclusion here. Sorry, just because my sister is in Tokyo and she's a professor of, everything. And so she helped me. Females that pursue competitive or elite sport are not competing for fun. We want to win. And including trans athletes mean that in general, on average, a woman won't win. Even if someone's answer is to give out an extra medal to trans athletes in the same race, I think that's been mentioned, women don't want to come second at the finish line. We want a race to touch the wall first, to lift the biggest weight, to throw the furthest, to jump the highest. It's not to come second in an unfair competition. I have no issues with being beaten. I came 6th at the Olympic Games and I'm really okay with that. Because I got beaten by women. I'm not okay with getting beaten by biological males.
Thank you, Deb. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Kat Kariner, who's come up from Sydney today. Kat has said to me several times that she's not a feminist, and of course I am. And my response to Kat is, well, I don't care if you're not a feminist, because I'm going to pick you over most of the women who call themselves feminists to be with me on the barricades. So, Kat is a founder and spokesperson for LGB Defence Australasia. She collaborated with others to establish the Active Watchful Waiting Association and established the website Lost Women's Rights, and I'd commend Kat for those pieces of work. Kat provides technical and other support to a number of gender-critical groups through the country, and she'll speak today on the impact of sex self-identification for lesbians. Thanks, Kat.
So I was lazy, in a sense, because... Is it? Is that it? Yep. All right. So when Anna asked me to talk, I had no time to make a talk. But what I had done is organised a number of women from Coalition of Activist Lesbians, myself, LGBT Defence, and LGBT Tasmania. I organised them to go and meet up with politicians, and we put together little scripts together, plus a story, so that they could actually go and see one after the other, and they've seen 29. So I thought, hold on, I'll use that. And I'll comment that we're going to be doing some more. This one will be on the impact of transgender on children. So I'm just going to plug that for the other people who would like to do that. We'll create scripts, you give your stories, but we'll educate the politicians all around Australia, and that's going to be a big drive for what we're going to be doing. Okay, so firstly, it's important to understand, if you haven't been in this movement before, that when you hear the term LGBTQ+++, we find people assume a homogeneous or united group. However, LGBTQ+ is referring to two different groups and concepts. The LGB represents same-sex attraction or sexual orientation, and the T and the Q, the trans and the queer, represent gender identity, a subjective feeling of being male or female. Gender identity ideology or queer ideology is promoted by organisations like Equality Australia, ACON, Rainbow Health Australia, and other members of an international lobby group, ILGA. And that's an important thing to know, that this is not a one-off thing. This is an international project that is coordinated and orchestrated and works very closely and powerfully together. And they work collectively to push gender identity ideology into the law and federal, state and local government policies through diversity and inclusion audits. Also education policy throughout Australia. For those of us who are same-sex attracted, their ideology is a threat to the victories for equality that we, lesbians, gay men, bisexuals and women fought so hard for. So we cover 4 major points. The right for lesbians to have full participation in public life, the right for gender non-conforming children and young people to live authentic lives and not be pressured to be trans. And we also look at the bans based on conversion therapy for same-sex attraction we think are good, but any ban referencing gender identity harms the youth of the LGBT community, those on the autistic spectrum, and troubled, vulnerable youth with mental health comorbidities like depression, anxiety, or have suffered trauma or abuse, etc. What we want when we're talking to the politicians is we want clear definitions of homosexuality, clear definitions of heterosexuality, bisexuality, woman and man be put back in law to stop the erasure of rights of LGBT and women. So you understand this is very much about language. So number 1, we want reinstatement of female-only safe spaces. We lesbians deserve the right to participate in public life and the means to meet life partners. This is made possible by the existence of female-only safe spaces, including change rooms and restrooms where lesbians can undress, shower, or use a toilet free from male gaze or male violence. When lesbians can access female-only safe spaces, our risk for victimization goes down and our comfort level goes up. We deserve the right to create our own lesbian-only safe spaces. And by the way, just in Victoria alone, Nicole Phillips noted that 100 lesbian spaces have gone down to 2. Where am I? Yeah. And hold lesbian-only events and to have men, heterosexuals and bisexuals respect our boundaries. When a state dictates that lesbians have to have males in their dating pool, the state is pressuring lesbians to be straight. Lesbians aren't hurting anyone by having our boundaries or by enjoying our relationships. When the state or the queer, and I call them the transgender diverse community, let's just cut the LGBT out completely, and activists pressure lesbians to try heterosexual sex or to unlearn our homosexuality, it's simply regressive. I heard this back in the 70s, you know. Lesbians should not be coerced into straight dating to comply with outdated attempts to change our sexual orientation. That is conversion therapy. Thank you. It was little, I want more of a yeah. Thank you. In Tasmania, Jessica Hoyle's request for a lesbian-only event was rejected. It was to be a social occasion created for lesbians to be entertained, meet and form relationships. It was refused because it's now dictated in law that women can't associate outside the presence of males. This is so wrong. And with this event, we must in fact include males in our dating pools. Again, this is simply conversion therapy. Plus a form of state-sanctioned rape culture. At the moment, we're seeing it exercised in particular with male prisons put into women's prisons in WA, New South Wales, Queensland, and worldwide, which has led to the rape of women in prisons. Duh. It's incredibly regressive steps for the state to take to ignore the long fight of lesbian and gays to be recognised as same-sex attracted, and only same-sex attracted. All past conversion therapies were based on the belief that gay men and lesbian women were wrong in their head and could be coerced or medically or psychologically treated to become straight. Banning female-only, I'm hoping I'm on the right page, yep. Banning female-only safe spaces excludes lesbians from public life and means to meet life partners. We can build a truly inclusive society by empowering lesbians to maintain our personal boundaries and the boundaries of our community. Okay, number 2. Lesbians have a right to live authentic lives and not be pressured to identify as men. One of my friends was mentioning that among the young lesbians group, 45 of them had trans. 45 in Sydney had trans. A lady I spoke to in California said, we can't find any young lesbians anywhere. They've disappeared. They're all trans. We have seen a push in schools and from the queer and activist lobbies for gender non-conforming youth, in particular girls, to believe they are in the wrong body. This is to conform their appearance to a heterosexual norm if they're attracted to the same sex. A boy who would normally grow up to be gay is expected to become a trans girl. A girl who would normally grow up to be a lesbian is expected to be a trans boy. This is at the heart of gender identity ideology, making homosexuals invisible, putting them through another door to the same old closet. Living an authentic life isn't conforming to gender norms and stereotypes. It means accepting your own body, personality, and sexual orientation by accepting same-sex relationships and embracing women who don't dress to attract men. Just thinking of women I know. We empower lesbians to accept and embrace themselves and live authentic lives. When lesbians feel pressure to conform to society's expectations and stereotypes, They may turn to artificial hormones and plastic surgery, impersonating heterosexual men as means of fitting in. Instead, all lesbians should be encouraged to practice self-love, accept their same-sex attraction, and take good care of their bodies. And this is so important for the young girls. When we push lesbians to be queer and to emulate men, we deny lesbian visibility. Without lesbian visibility, young lesbians don't have role models. It's important for girls to have role models who are strong and independent, not like you. Probably like you, actually, when we get to it. But who have positive relationships with other women and who don't dress for men's pleasure. Having strong female role models teaches girls that it's okay to break stereotypes and you don't have to be born male to be happy and successful. When we embrace lesbians as women worthy of respect, we work towards true diversity by empowering women and girls to see the possibilities in their lives. Lesbian visibility teaches younger generations of women and girls that their sex doesn't determine where they go in life. They're free to live independently, dress however they want, and love whoever they choose. Lesbian visibility teaches girls that it's okay to break stereotypes. Lesbians shouldn't have to keep their sexual orientation hidden behind male impersonation to fit in. Banning female-only safe spaces excludes lesbians from public life. We cannot build a truly inclusive society if we push women and lesbians to have their personal boundaries violated and the boundaries of our community. Number 3. Okay. Conversion therapy ban based on gender identity is bad. Based on sexual orientation only is good. I'm making it really simple so it's clear to people. Okay? Self-ID laws are being pushed throughout the country and they're piggybacking also on conversion therapy ban because they go together. Self-ID laws, you'll notice, allow men who are older, they don't have to change anything. They can keep a beard, a mustache, and they still can be called women. But notice, with the conversion therapy bans, it's automatically pushed for young children to go on a medical pathway. Notice that? Self-ID is part of the gender industry. There's money in it. A young child is worth at least something like 100 to 250k, and that's not even including reparatory surgery that is done to repair the damages of surgery like phalloplasties and the scrapes that came off the arms and all that kind of rubbish. Because the vehicle for inserting mandatory gender affirmation into law is a ban against suppressing or changing gender identity. Put a hand up if anyone's actually got a real definition of gender identity. Pity you don't see anybody, but I'm just going to tell everybody, no hand has gone up. Okay. Influential transgender diverse lobby groups such as Equality Australia, Boo, and Rainbow Health Australia, Boo. ACON, Boo. -18, Headspace, Transphobe. Yep. Are persuading politicians that exploration of issues or talk therapy related to gender identity entails the same harmful practices as past conversion practices used to change sexual orientation. This is false and this is a lie. Here's the rub. Any so-called conversion therapy ban that includes gender identity is harmful to gender non-conforming, LGB, kids on the spectrum, and other vulnerable children, young people, including those affected by social contagion, autism, or have mental health comorbidities. And these days, actually, it's expanded just to young girls with a push for being neither male or female because there's a new market on non-binary. At this time, we've formed a group of detransitioners and trans and mums who are angry, really angry, and parents and teachers and health professionals, which is called Active Watchful Waiting. It was a project that spun out of LGBT Defence. And what we're doing is I'm not going to go too much into it, but what we're doing is we're making sure that detransitioners can get the support and help they can get. We are lobbying politicians. We are talking directly to doctors and to schools. We're going to stop the pipeline of conversion therapy of kids. And we're going to expose these bastards who are doing harm to children. So I just want to say to those folk out there, you're on the wrong side. We're on the side to keep kids intact, whole, their bodies unfragmented. You're on the side that is destroying them, that are making a future of sterilisation, of diseases, of a shortened lifespan. You are on the wrong side, and you are going to lose. We want to keep children and young people intact, whole, and address the root causes of self-hate, abuse, internalized misogyny, exposure to gender identity indoctrination, and internalized homophobia that gender non-conforming young people experience. Working these issues out with exploratory talk therapy is preferable to automatically put them on a one-size-fits-all pathway of drugs, hormones, and surgery. What can be done? We've come to the end. Okay. We want the harm taken out of gender identity ideology. We want to take the guts out of it. Okay. We need clear definitions of homosexuality, heterosexuality, bisexuality, woman and man that are not tautological in logic, but based on scientific evidence, not subjective, unverifiable feelings. We can have no rights for women or homosexuals if woman or homosexuality is not clearly defined in law. We find the concept of gender identity is problematic. The word gender and gender identity was coined by a pedophilic Dr. John Money. It's been used for decades to pathologize, I hate that word, pathologize, thank you, homosexuality and non-stereotypical behaviour. The term gender hasn't a stable definition, so that makes using it coherently impossible, which is why sex-based language gives us a common language to understand each other. That's the purpose of language. Okay. The legislation needs to be amended so that sex is not conflated with gender identity in law.
Yes.
Okay. B, we do not want legislation banning conversion therapy based on gender identity for children and young people, i.e. gender affirming care. Gender affirming care is just a euphemism for conversion therapy. C, we want a statutory provision to declare that sex is a paramount protected characteristic and a halt to the presumption that gender identity displaces the protected characteristic of sex. D, we want statutory provision for funding, services and spaces that are provided for women on the basis of their sex. So normally we finish there with a bit of a story, but I was thinking out there, what are your objections? Okay, well, they might be. How much time have I got?
0.
Moving on. So one objection, but trans women are women. No. We say men, because people find that sex-based language is necessary to improve the safety and well-being of lesbians and women. Going along with the idea that men can be women, that wet is dry, that hot is cold, that dark is light, that men can be women implies that lesbians should be attracted to men. This implication stigmatizes homosexuality and promotes rape and sexual coercion of lesbians. Okay, another one. Another objection. Many lesbians transition to be their authentic selves. Our society often shames lesbians. We're right on the bottom of the pool, would you say, Helen? Yeah. Our society often shames lesbians, which can make us feel uncomfortable in our own skins. Instead of helping lesbians to work through trauma and improve our self-image, therapists often diagnose lesbians in distress with so-called gender dysphoria in order to sell them drugs and surgery. And when the medical establishment sterilizes lesbians and damages our bodies in order to make us look like heterosexual men, this is eugenics. Doctors are turning lesbians to facsimiles of men and making them dependent on Big Pharma for life. I've got lots more objections, but I... lostontransition.org.au. It will be awwa.org.au, so but at the moment it's on Lost Transition. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Is that presentation something we can all get behind? Yes. Again? Yes. Thank you very much. I will mention before I introduce our next speaker that Edie Wyatt, who apologised today because she's ill, has written a very good piece in the current Spectator on gay men. I recommend that we all read it. Our next speaker is Steph Hughes. Steph is co-founder of Fair Go for Queensland Women and has undertaken graduate study in developmental trauma as well as domestic and family violence. She has an ongoing interest in research in this area. Steph has a particular interest in the damaging effects on women in prison who are forced to be housed with trans-identified men. She's a mother to 2 sons, and the title of her presentation is The Impact of Sex Self-Identification on Women in Prisons and on Crime Statistics. Thank you, Steph.
Is it afternoon? Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see you all. See some familiar faces and some new ones too. Thank you all for your. Oh, put the mic up down. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
No, a little closer.
Is that any better? Oh God, someone keeps saying no. Hello.
Really close.
Okay. Good afternoon. Oh. Good afternoon, and thank you all for your interest in today's meeting. It's so nice to see you all here. I'm going to demonstrate that DJAG, Department of Justice and Attorney General, already know self-ID is unworkable and unsafe for women and girls in general, but women in prison in particular. First of all, is that right? Yeah. First of all, I will demonstrate how DJAG already knows self-ID poses a risk to incarcerated women. Secondly and simply, humans cannot change sex. Our birth certificates record sex, not gender identity. Similarly, prison allocation needs to remain based on sex because of the persistence of male pattern violence and on the grounds of retaining women's safety, dignity and privacy. We already have mechanisms in place to keep males out of female prison estates. Yet those means are being ignored both here in Queensland and everywhere where self-ID is in place, to the detriment of incarcerated women. Please note that today's discussion is going to have some talk of sexual and other violence, so please take care of yourself and reach out for support if you need. In June this year, DJAG staff spoke to myself and some women from Fair Go for Queensland Women and in IWD Brisbane Meanjin about their intended self-ID legislation. In the few minutes we had at the end, after being spoken at for 45 minutes, we asked, how will self-ID be operationalised by other departments and services? How will the needs of all Queenslanders be upheld? We were told That's not a concern for DJ. They just need to write the legislation. Everyone else will have to work it out later. To be blunt, I submit that this is unacceptable and a failure of due process and due diligence. If the government seeks to institute new legislation that will impact upon the community, they must be able to show how it will work for all Queenslanders in an impartial manner and demonstrate how they arrived at their conclusion. Despite that, if we are to take this public servant at their word, and the department truly doesn't need to consider how self-ID might work in practice for other departments and services, we shall look directly then at what DJ already knows. And I contend the department knows full well that self-ID is not workable or safe, and persisting as they are in this manner is pure bloody mindedness. In 2013, a man attempted to enter a number of homes with a view to stealing belongings from those homes. Upon entering one, the man came across a woman asleep, pinned her to the bed with his thighs, covered her mouth with his hand and used the other to touch her genitals outside of her clothes. The woman's daughter awoke upon hearing the struggle when the woman scratched the man on the face, or I think it's the face, and they fell to the floor, whereupon the man slammed the woman's head into the ground more than once. When he saw the daughter, he left through a window. The offender was convicted of sexual assault and other offences in August 2013. Further offences and behaviours of concern undertaken by the detainee while in the male prisoner state include entering the officer station in October 2014 and pressing his erect penis against a female correctional officer's arm, as well as masturbating in front of a female chaplain. Due to the ongoing behaviour of the prisoner and their assessment of the risk he would pose in the community, DJ made application to have him considered for an order relating to serious or violent offenders or dangerous sexual offenders. The application was ultimately dismissed. This person was interviewed and assessed by no less than 3 psychiatrists. We are not told when the individual began identifying as transgender, but we do know that the assessments occurred in 2021 and 22. Not one of the reports by those 3 independent psychiatrists appears to have referred to the individual as transgender, as all quotes from the reports have the pronouns altered to say that this man is a she. This makes for disconcerting reading and begs the question, when was the claim of transgender identity made, and why does the court see fit to alter the reports made by others? Indeed, one of the experts even told the court that they do not consider the claimed transgender identity to be factual. Now, I would ask, if we are going to proceed with a system of self-identification and the Supreme Court and DJ will not respect the assessment of a psychiatrist over the proclamation of an individual, even before we have self-ID legislation, what use is there for disincentives to lie in the self-declaration? Even if such a thing was possible when gender identity is even such a thing possible when gender identity is wholly and solely within inside the head of the individual? Is this any way to govern a state?
No.
Thank you. I put it to you that this proves self-identification is unworkable for the community and also means that self-ID is not in the interests of so-called trans community either, as predators will use this loophole and cause harm in their name. it gets better, or worse, as the case may be. As it happens, this individual, who DJAG assessed to be a risk in the community for offences such as unwanted touching, flashing and other sexual offences, likely linked to his impulsivity, was rearrested barely a month later on other charges that could be seen as callous, impulsive and opportunistic. The media reports all refer to this individual as a man. There is no reference whatsoever to this person claiming to be transgender. So this proves again that this legislation, the proposed legislation, is faulty and not in the public interest. This person has claimed a transgender identity when arguably they may have thought they would seek some benefit from doing so. But the moment it was not needed, it was shed. As identified on the screen, this has been identified as a problem in other jurisdictions too. One might say, well, if he's rearrested and detained, then there are risk assessment procedures in place, even if he does claim to be transgender again. Well, we have already seen how that has worked out. Lisa Jones, a convicted sex offender who identifies as transgender, housed in the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre in Victoria. The state, DJAG, told us they wish to emulate. Jones was deported from Germany after spending time in prison in relation to sexual offending against a female child. In Victoria, Jones attempted to rape a woman and was reported in the media as both a woman and female. Despite this, he is currently housed in a female prison. I put it to you that the risk assessment procedures that are spoken about do not in any way attend to the needs of incarcerated women, and we should be highly dubious of any claims to the contrary. To be very clear, DJAG knows very well about the individual I've recently spoken about, and as such, they know about these risks of self-identification. The very fact that this person was arrested again within days of release and now appears quite content to be referred to as a man suggests that the claim of transgender status may have been used to seek leniency in the courts. Some final thoughts on this individual and the blatant unsuitability of self-ID. If this male made other males deeply uncomfortable due to his overtly sexualised behaviour while in the male prison estate, what might be expected or predicted to occur if he were to be detained in the female prison estate? This person is reported in court documents to have limited impulse control and, if given access and opportunity, may very well commit sexual offences against women. It is in this way that self-ID legislation could create a situation where a man harms a woman or girl in a women-only space and is then placed in a female prison estate with vulnerable women who cannot escape. Perversely, due to the same collective madness, a woman who objects to this could also be placed in prison with that man. One might say, well, Steph, it's only one person, and yes, that's true, but the bottom line is, this man is male, and this is about male pattern violence and male criminality. The graph up on the screen right now talks to the number of males versus females in the Queensland prison estate on the 30th of June each year from 2013 to 16. You can see the vast difference between males and females. But also, the number of men who say they are women in Queensland prisons compared to women who say they are men is also explanatory. This is about male pattern criminality. Sex matters. In 2017, in Queensland prisons, there were almost as many male prisoners who claimed to be transgender with the most serious charge or conviction of aggravated sexual assault as there were females for the same charge or conviction. So, as Deb said, just take a moment to take that in. Out of all the women in Queensland, there were 698 women in prison on the 30th of June 2017. Of those 698, 9 women were in prison in response to a most serious charge or conviction of aggravated sexual assault. That's about, or just over, 1% of the entire female prison population. Now, consider the allegedly tiny, vulnerable and oppressed transgender community. In that same year, over 25% of the population of men who say they are women were housed in prison for that same charge or conviction. This is not comparative. This is the difference between male and female criminality. This does not suggest that men who say they are women are actually similar to women in terms of their propensity to commit sexual violence. And it needs to be talked about. What happens to our data on sexual violence when these offences are recorded as being committed by women? We simply cannot remove our ability to accurately record and analyse male violence. We simply cannot have a situation where women are being held responsible for male perpetrated crimes. I submit it is dangerous and neglectful for anyone to subject incarcerated women to this level of risk and unnecessary trauma. We know that males present a significant risk to women in the prison environment. In times of war, we have the Geneva Convention, which sets out that males and females must be housed separately. Australia is party to that UN instrument. In civilian spaces, we have the Mandela Rules, which holds there are different categories of prisoner and they must be housed separately. Those categories include youth versus adult and men versus women. As the Mandela Rules were first written in the 50s, it's quite safe to say that this refers to men as adult human males and women as adult human females. Make no mistake, to enable males to be housed in the female prison estate, one must dutifully ignore the entirely predictable outcomes such policies will create, and similarly, completely ignore the examples of when these very things have already occurred. It too requires the elevation of the Yogyakarta principles over the far more established Mandela Rules. We have been aware for quite some time that the women who are incarcerated in our prisons are likely to be women who have considerable experiences related to trauma linked to male violence. We have decades of documentation of male violence and female victimisation, and how incarcerated women are highly likely to have significant trauma histories. This includes reports by the Queensland Human Rights Commission, who use the Mandela Rules as a basis from which to analyse the treatment of Queensland women in prison, right up until the point of when they want to talk about males in prison, and then they switch to the Yogyakarta principles. It's like reading an article on evolution, but then having a paragraph in the middle talking about Adam and Eve. And why? To attend to the interests of males who identify as women over the well-established and hard-fought-for rights of women. It is, she's that bell. It is, to my mind, the epitome of male entitlement and self-interest that long-established sex-based rights of women are completely forgotten when a man comes along and wants to encroach on our spaces and violate boundaries, and then to also brand those of us who raise this issue as TERFs, bigots and other such smears. As others have talked about today, what you can do: talk, write, speak to others about what's going on. Remind your local member that women exist and we have protections in law. Ask, where is the polling to show that Queenslanders are on board with this and that they understand what the implications are? Do the legislators who are writing this legislation understand what the implications are? Where's the evidence of broad consultation? And finally, before she rings the bell again, self-ID cannot progress in the way that it has in other jurisdictions. There must remain clear ways to delineate and record sex, and the two, sex and gender identity, cannot be conflated. Sex matters in many areas of life, and the status and well-being of women and girls relies upon this being recognised. Incarcerated women's needs for safety, privacy and dignity must not be ignored in favour of subjective notions of gender.
Thank you very much, Steph. I think when we all write our letters to MPs, and in particular to the Attorney General, Shannon Fentiman, there's a whole lot of useful data and information in that presentation. I'd like to introduce now our final speaker, Dr. Diana Kenny. When I gave evidence with my friend Helen in 2020 to the Parliamentary Committee that was looking at the Born in the Wrong Body legislation, and we knew that nothing that we had to say would avert the outcome, a number of people gave presentations. The one that was the most impressive, the one when you could have heard a pin drop in the room, came from Dr. Diana Kenny. Diana, I almost said Diana's a champion weightlifter. Diana's not a champion weightlifter. She's a former professor of psychology at the University of Sydney. She's now a consulting psychologist, psychotherapist, mediator, family dispute resolution practitioner, expert reviewer, report writer, supervisor, researcher, and author. Diana has had extensive experience working with gender questioning young people and their families. It gives me huge pride to introduce Diana.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. I'm described on trans websites as a member of the lunatic fringe, so I think I'm in good company here today. So in this brief presentation, I'd like to give you a flavour of the complexity entailed in working clinically with young people with gender identity issues. I will begin with enumerating the dimensions that must be addressed in therapy. I will then illustrate some of these dimensions with case studies from my own practice that demonstrate the varied presentations and personalised requirements for ethical care of these young people and their families. My clinical work has convinced me that young people are almost never ready to self-identify as trans. So there are basically 4 distinct groups of self-identifiers. The first are what we call early onset transgender young people, and these used to be young preschool boys. And that's historically where the majority of transgender people came from. Very young boys, and they tend to be persisters. They're very, very rare. I've never had a case referred to me. The second group are the ones that I'm most concerned about, and I think most of us are most concerned about, and that's the adolescent onset, sometimes called ROGD, rapid onset gender dysphoria. This is a very recent phenomenon, and I've written extensively on the possibility that social contagion is at work, but I've been completely vilified for this opinion, because if social contagion is the cause of this incredible surge of rapid onset gender dysphoria in adolescents, the pillars of gender ideology collapse. And that's why they deny regret, they deny detransition. Even though on one website, the subreddit website, there are now 57,000 young people who have detransitioned. But it's all a lie as far as the transgender lobby is concerned. So the third group are the over 18s and young adults. Unlike the bias towards females in ROGD referrals, the over 18s referred to my practice are more equally distributed between males and females. The majority are referred by parents, even though they are legally adults, so most of them don't come of their own accord. Their management is complicated by the fact that they are legally adults and are able to make their own decisions and independently of their parents. And the fourth group are the mature-aged adults, and probably one of the best examples of that would be someone called Scott Nugent, which you've probably all heard about, who transitioned in his late 30s and regrets it, recognising finally that he was in fact a lesbian after having been married for 20 years and fathered 3 children, or mothered 3 children. Yes, so he is living with horrific consequences of transgendering. So many present in this category after the breakdown of their marriages with a history of long-term cross-dressing and fantasies about being the other sex. Others present as single adults who have been socially transitioned for many years, having first identified as butch lesbians and decide to finalise their transition surgically. So this is a very, very complex area of clinical practice, and it's very important in the intake assessment to find out what young people don't know about themselves, because they are extremely strident in their belief that they are trans and that transitioning is going to fix everything, all of the problems of their lives. And there is no point arguing with them directly about the fact that they are right, and anyone who tells them otherwise are idiots, including me. So I don't tell them that they're wrong. But I say, you've heard this term, exploratory psychotherapy. And it's the provision of a safe space for these young people to really look at their lives in a way that they haven't done before. So the first thing we have to look at is their family constellation. Is there family conflict and dysfunction, and what are the marital and sibling dynamics? I've worked with more than maybe 50 or 60 young people in long-term psychotherapy as of this date, and I can say almost categorically that I didn't see one functional marriage amongst this group of young people. Then we have to do a psychological evaluation, and it includes, you know, the old chestnuts of ADHD, ADD, autism spectrum. Are they self-harming? Are they suicidal? Are they engaging in non-suicidal self-injury? Do they have anxiety, depression, incipient borderline personality disorder? possibly psychoses of some kind, and ACEs, which are the adverse childhood events that involve trauma. How many of them have had a history of body dysmorphia and or eating disorders? What has their school experience been like? What is their attitude to school? Are they interested in study? Are they doing well academically? Have they experienced peer rejection, bullying? Have they truanted? And what are their post-school aspirations? One of the most important and neglected areas is looking at their cognitive style. And by that, I assess the degree to which they are cognitively immature. Are they concrete thinkers? Are they cognitively rigid? And do they engage in cognitive distortions? The majority of young people who come to me aged around 11, 12 to up to 15 are cognitively immature. And this is why putting them in the front seat of self-identification and declaring themselves transgender is a completely wrong-headed approach to this issue. They lack the understanding, or they misunderstand gender ideology. They've just swallowed it whole without examining its precepts or the illogicality of its basic tenets, and they cannot argue from a logical perspective or a mature perspective. They can feed you everything that they've read on the internet, and they can give it back to you verbatim, but that is not being an independent thinker. So the next thing that I assess is to what degree do they understand the gravity and irreversibility of medical and surgical transition, and what gender-affirming treatment actually entails and the consequences of that treatment. For example, infertility, sexual dysfunction, complications of cross-sex hormones and surgery, and lifelong patienthood. What have their sexual experience been like? Have they had any sexual experience to know for absolutely sure that they don't care about sex, which is what every single one of them tell me. They're not interested in that stuff. But when I explore the extent of their sexual relationships, even in the older adolescent age group, 16 to 18, they've had virtually no sexual experience. The majority have not had sexual abuse experiences, but their sexual knowledge and their sexual activity is minimal, and one would expect it to be at this young age. There's not promiscuity in this group, which is interesting. Then we look at social cognition, and by that I mean the influence of the ecological systems that they're operating in. For schools, have they been to gender clinics? How much have they accessed on the internet, and how embedded are they in the online transgender communities? I then talk to them about their perceptions and misperceptions of gender roles, and finally examine the systemic function of the rapid onset group. And this entails underlying dynamics such as defiance of parents, finding an in-group because they've often experienced isolation and marginalisation in their own peer groups, actually being seen, being heroic, feeling heroic, denying development of their sexed bodies, a fear of adulthood and a fear of sexual relationships. These are some of the underlying dynamics that are never mentioned in any transgender literature that you're likely to read. A very big issue in this group is to assess the self-harm and suicidality, because this is a flagship of the trans lobby. Better to have a live son than a dead daughter, and vice versa. If you don't let this child transition, they're going to kill themselves. This is what's said to parents in gender clinics. And so the parents are put into a terrible bind about allowing their child to destroy their own bodies for life, or fearing that their child will no longer be walking the planet if they're not allowed to do it. It's a terrible choice for parents. So my conceptualisation, and I stress this is my own conceptualisation, it has not been proved empirically or anything like that, it's based on my clinical experience. But I have come to the conclusion that for most young people who want to transition, there is a vulnerable, traumatised part of the self that is hated. So it is subsumed into the competent self, which is the part that suppresses all doubts and anxiety and presses for gender transition. If the traumatised self pushes for recognition of their psychic pain, the young person may resort to self-harm and suicidal ideation, which is a form of acting out of their self-hatred against their own bodies and selves. Affirming clinicians collude with the patient's own attacks on the traumatised self by traumatising their bodies with cross-sex hormones and mutilating surgery. They hope that transition will restore the young person to an ideal state. Medics become omnipotent creators of this ideal state. When this fails, the patient sinks into further self-hatred, which is enacted through self-harming and suicidal states. I might add that a very important paper by Michael Bibbs from the UK examined the actual suicide rates in transgender young people, and he found the rate was 4 in 15,000. So it's kind of a cry wolf from the trans lobby that this is the reason you must transition your child now, or this is the reason you must put them on puberty blockers. We have to save them, you know, from a fate worse than death. So what are the mechanisms of social contagion? Because this is the position that I'm taking on why we're seeing a 4,000% increase in young people declaring themselves transgender. That figure comes from the United Kingdom. So peer contagion is a very powerful socialising force on children, and it begins in the preschool years. By middle childhood, gender is the most important factor in the formation of peer associations, highlighting the significance of gender as an organising principle of the norms and values associated with gender identity. The rapid onset group have often experienced peer rejection, bullying, hostility and or social isolation, and hence feel marginalised from peer groups. They will gravitate to the rainbow clubs. What's happening? The rainbow clubs in schools, where everyone is accepted without question, especially if they declare that they're an alternative gender, whereupon they are lauded and validated, even when they had no previous intention to do so. So social contagion is a very powerful phenomenon underlying the staggering increases in primarily adolescent girls declaring themselves transgender. Social contagion is identified as a mechanism in eating disorders, self-harm and suicide, substance abuse and emotion transmission, and now its role in gender dysphoria can no longer be denied. Another mechanism of social contagion is deviancy training, and this is where deviant attitudes and behaviours are rewarded by a peer group. And if you engage in those behaviours, then you've got this subgroup, outgroup, of which you are now an important member. So you become an outcast to become a member of an in-group. And the third main mechanism is something we call co-rumination. And this is a process of repetitive discussion, rehearsal and speculation about a problematic issue within the peer diet. And this is often a way that the transmission of suicide occurs in clusters in adolescent young people. It results in increases in internalising disorders such as anxiety and depression and gender confusion. And we know from studies outside of the gender dysphoria literature that young adolescent females are most affected. So I want to give you an example from my practice of the cognitive rigidity that occurs in these young people. And most of these arise from what's happening in the family constellation and the messages that are sometimes communicated inadvertently by parents to their children. So the first example was a boy who had a special needs younger sister who got all the attention. Watching his mother tend to his sister one day, he said, "Mummy, you will only love me if I am a girl," thereupon declaring himself transgender. A loved father appears to love her brother more than his daughter and spends much more time engaged in male pursuits with his son. She says, "I want to be close to Dad, but he spends all his time with my brother and never with me." She concluded it's better to be a boy and declared herself transgender. Now she is in a perpetual rage that her father does not accept her transgender identity because she feels she has nothing more to offer him. A third case. A mother tells her pre-adolescent daughter, who was described as a tomboy, about the sexual abuse she experienced as a child by her stepfather and the sexual assault she endured as a teenager. Her daughter formed the view that girls are unsafe in the company of men and are constantly at risk of harm, particularly as they approach puberty. She decided that being female sucked, in her words, and that she would prefer to be a male in order to keep herself safe and strong. A 15-year-old girl has a mother who has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. She's lived with her mother's emotional storms and capriciousness all her life. When she has an outburst, her father says, "You have your mother's BPD and I don't want to have to deal with that again." He would then leave the house. Her father told her, "It's because you were the firstborn. The firstborn girl in Mum's family always got the worst mental illness." This girl formed the view that men and boys are saner than women and girls, and that it would be preferable to change gender rather than turn out like her mother. I've got plenty more, but I just thought these are salient examples of how these young people are thinking, because we don't hear about this kind of detail in the media, we don't hear about it in the translated literature. So family constellation is incredibly important in these young people. Identity is not hardwired. It develops in a social world where the young person experiences attachments, trauma, abuse, or misperceives the meaning of experiences because of cognitive maturity or concrete thinking, which are attempts to solve the problems of their current lives. So we need to explore in detail their identifications, that is, who I want to be like, but also their disidentifications, who I don't want to be like. So I'm just going to give you an example of a young boy, a 14-year-old natal boy, to show you that gender identity is very, very far from fixed as soon as the child self-identifies as trans or declares himself transgender. So this 14-year-old natal boy first came out to his parents as gay, and his parents were modern parents and they were very accepting. They said, "That's fine, you'll have a happy life, and if that's the kind of life that you're going to be leading, then we are very supportive." So everything was good up until that point. Then he soon changed his declaration to bisexual when he experienced a powerful crush on a female classmate. After she rejected him, he was heartbroken and he came out as trans and demanded puberty blockade and cross-sex hormones immediately. In therapy, his demands for transition were strident and incessant. He constantly asked me when I was going to tell his parents that he could go ahead with his transition. His parents had put me in the very difficult position of saying I have to wait for the report from your gender therapist before we make a decision. So of course I had to stretch out this therapy for as long as I possibly could until, we could work through some of the issues. But he went ahead and shaved his legs, his arms and his body hair. He grew his hair long and he started to wear eye makeup and nail polish. He ordered female clothing from the internet and wore it secretly in his room. When his parents confiscated these clothing items, his female friends at school lent him their clothes to wear until I advised his parents to put a stop to this. Teachers at his school started calling him by his preferred name and pronouns until I advised his parents not to allow this. Several months after therapy commenced, while still vehemently protesting his trans female identity, he wrote a letter to his parents apologising for misleading them. He said he now realised that he was not a trans female, but a demigirl, denoting partial non-binary and partial female gender identity. He was very schooled in all the lingo. He changed this orientation shortly thereafter to demi-boy, before again writing to his parents, telling them that he was only joking about the whole thing and that they were the only people who had taken his joke seriously. I advised his parents to eat humble pie and give their son the opportunity to exit the gender maze without losing face. So they said nothing. The next day, he asked his parents to take him for a haircut and declared himself male and straight. So this all occurred over an 11-month therapy. So this is just one indicative tale of how many young people are confused about their sexual orientation and often conflate sexual orientation with gender identity. So the majority of young gender dysphoric adolescents have had no sexual experience other than crushes from a long distance, hand-holding and perhaps kissing. They have an absolute disdain of sex as gross and declare themselves pan in compensation. They are indifferent to the loss of sexual function and fertility. They don't care about sex, and if they want children, they'll adopt. Standard answer. And they're confused about the nature of trans relationships. So for example, a self-declared non-binary male, natal sex male, in a relationship with a transgender declaring natal female, that is, a trans man, told their parents they were in a gay male relationship. Similarly, two natal females, both trans men, no transition had occurred as yet, rejected the suggestion that they were a lesbian couple and stated that they were a gay male couple. Now, internalised homophobia is unfortunately on the rise, as most of you who are engaged with LGBT issues would know, that it's not cool to be gay anymore. So if an adolescent realises that they're same-sex attracted, they find this unacceptable due to parental or internalised homophobia, and the adolescent reasoning goes as follows. Being same-sex attracted is bad and shameful. My parents will reject me if I'm gay. If I'm a boy attracted to other boys, I must be a girl, and therefore need to transition so that my attraction to boys becomes heterosexual. That is their reasoning. And I'll just give you one example. Artem, aged 15, from a Middle Eastern country that is homophobic, was referred by his mother for a range of issues, but specifically because he had declared himself transgender. He was post-pubertal, facially and bodily hirsute with a very deep male voice. Artem was insistent that he was transgender and was impatient to commence his social transition and to obtain prescriptions for cross-sex hormones. This is how Artem described himself. I see myself as bisexual. I have feelings for guys and girls, more like a pan thing. I've had a boyfriend who identifies as male and pan since last year. We get together, just the two of us. We visit each other's houses. I guess it would be okay with being gay. For me, it fluctuates. So he's recognising his innate gayness, but it fluctuates because of what his parents say and think. So of his mother, Artem said, "Mum knows I have this friend. She doesn't know that he is my boyfriend. I don't think Mum will take it well because she asks me if I still like girls. She wouldn't take kindly to knowing I'm gay and have a boyfriend." When asked to describe his father, he said, "Dad is trying to suppress his queer phobia, but he says bad things about LGB. He's anti it all. He got angry with me for refuting what he was saying. Dad said gay is about anal sex, and that is gross. Then Mum told him to shut up, and I went to my room and cried. Dad is anti-queer for sure. He tries to suppress it because he still loves me. I felt very disappointed in Dad when he expressed these sentiments. He will be very freaked out if he thinks I am queer, gay or trans." So, in conclusion, it is imperative to keep the developmental path open into adulthood. Young people need frontal lobe maturation that occurs only in their early 20s and is not complete until about 25 years of age, so that young people can come to know themselves. They should not be pressured into self-identification at the age of 12 or 13. Psychological trauma from the past forms part of their psychic structure in the present. The expression of these traumas is socio-culturally embedded. That is, social contagion permits particular forms of acting out of these traumas. And in this era of adolescence, the acceptable form is to declare yourself trans, not gay. Envy and rivalry are part of the human condition, and unconscious envy is a factor in trans identification. Gender dysphoric adolescents need assistance to explore their defences and internal psychic conflicts and manage their psychic pain before irreparably altering their bodies. As Evans and Evans said, the body is used to act out something that cannot be accepted or processed by the mind. Clinicians should not collude with the fantasy that the embodied self can be altered or removed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Diana, for those very valuable insights. I think as more and more of us have young people in our families or in our friends' families who are confused about their sex and get into this very trendy gender identity ideology, I think that those insights will become very useful for more and more of us. We're not going to have time for the panel discussion. We'll go straight to afternoon tea, and you'll be able to engage informally with the speakers. Ask them questions, let them know your thoughts about their presentations. Before we do that, however, I know there are 3 resolutions that individual women want to propose for this meeting to move. If you're ready to do those now, that will be great. Yes, Amanda has a resolution. Incidentally, the video recording has stopped and the live streaming has stopped. So Amanda and who else? Leah